Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. Another batch of subpoenas from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. We'll hear from the committee Vice Chair, Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying the House vote will go on as scheduled next week on the $1.75 trillion social spending and tax bill, as soon as there is an official cost estimate from the Congressional Budget Office, as moderate House Democrats have demanded. Pfizer asking U.S. regulators to allow boosters of its COVID-19 vaccine for anyone 18 years old and above. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery begins 2 days of allowing the public to approach the tomb and lay flowers ahead of Veterans Day, this year the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the tomb. And former VA Administrator and U.S. Senator Max Cleland has died. He was a Democrat, and we'll hear from him what he thought of the Republican strategy that helped his opponent defeat him in his re-election bid. From CNN, the House committee investigating the deadly January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol announced on Tuesday a new batch of 10 subpoenas to former White House officials under President Donald Trump, as the panel charges ahead in seeking testimony and documents from witnesses relevant to the probe. Subpoenas follow 6 others that were announced Monday. The subpoenas sent out today include Nicholas Luna, former President Trump's personal assistant, Molly Michael, Trump's special assistant to the president, Oval Office operations coordinator, Ben Williamson, Trump's deputy assistant to the president, senior advisor to then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Christopher Liddell, former Trump White House deputy chief of staff, John McAtee, White House personnel director under Trump, Keith Kellogg, national security advisor to then Vice President Mike Pence, Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary, Steve Miller, Trump senior advisor, Cassidy Hutchinson, special advisor to the president for legislative affairs, and Kenneth Kokoski, former senior counsel to the Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark. The chair of the House Select Committee is Democrat Benny Thompson. He said his panel wants to learn every detail of what went on in the White House on January 6th and the days beforehand. He says he wants to know precisely what role former President Trump and his aides played in efforts to stop the counting of the electoral votes, if they were in touch with anyone outside the White House attempting to overturn the outcome of the election. Well, the vice chair of that committee is Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming, and she today was at the Naki S. Loeb School of Communications in St. Anselm College Institute of Politics, Manchester, New Hampshire. They were holding a First Amendment Awards program, and she was the keynote speaker.
And at this moment, when it matters most, we are also confronting a domestic threat that we've never faced before. A former president who's attempting to unravel the foundations of our constitutional republic, aided by political leaders who have made themselves willing hostages to this dangerous and irrational man. Just last night, former President Trump was invited by House Republican leaders to be the keynote speaker at our annual large fundraising dinner. At the dinner, he reportedly said once again that the insurrection was on November 3rd, and that the events of January 6th, when a violent mob invaded the Capitol in an effort to overturn the will of the American people and stop the constitutional process of the counting of electoral votes, that those events were a protest, that they were justified. Political leaders who sit silent in the face of these false and dangerous claims are aiding a former president who is at war with the rule of law and the Constitution. When our constitutional order is threatened, as it is now, rising above partisanship is not simply an aspiration, it is an obligation of every one of us. Now, I am a conservative Republican. I disagree strongly with nearly everything President Biden has done since he's been in office. His policies are bad for this country. I believe deeply that conservative principles, limited government, low taxes, a strong national defense, the family as the essential building block of our nation and our society, those are the right ideals for this country. I love my party. I love its history. I love its principles. But I love my country more. I know this nation needs a Republican Party that is based on truth, one that puts forward our ideals and our policies based on substance, one that is willing to reject the former president's lies, one that is willing to tell the truth, that millions of Americans have been tragically misled by former President Trump, who continues to this day to use language that he knows provoked violence on January 6th. We need a Republican Party that is led by people who remember that the peaceful transfer of power is sacred, and it undergirds the very foundations of our republic. We need Republican leaders who remember that fidelity to the Constitution, fidelity to the rule of law, those are the most conservative of conservative principles.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, vice chair of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol, invited today to be the speaker at the Loeb School of Communications fundraiser and First Amendment Awards program held in Manchester, New Hampshire. More than a dozen top Trump administration officials violated the terms of the Hatch Act ahead of the 2020 elections, according to a new report by the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. That's a 1939 law, the Hatch Act, dealing with public servants and their campaign activities. The list of officials, including President Trump's former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. The report saying that this stemmed from the former president on down, laying the groundwork for what appeared to be a taxpayer-funded campaign apparatus within the upper echelons of the executive branch. And today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling for an investigation by the House Ethics Committee and outside law enforcement into Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, after Gosar tweeted a photoshopped animated video showing him killing Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, and swinging swords at President Biden. You're listening to Washington Today. House Speaker Pelosi confirming that the Democrats' $1.75 trillion climate, child care, health, and other social spending bill will be getting a vote in the House next week. This bill goes by the name Reconciliation Bill after the budget process under which it's being considered. Also, Build Back Better, that's the name that President Biden gave it. And it contains some tax increases on wealthy people and corporations. On Friday, House moderate Democrats who wanted more information on the cost of the social spending bill, and House progressive Democrats who wanted to pass the reconciliation bill and the bipartisan infrastructure bill together, well, they struck a deal. The infrastructure bill voted on immediately. It did pass Friday. Social spending bill is voted on, quote, as expeditiously as we receive fiscal information from the Congressional Budget Office, but in no event later than the week of November 15th. Question today to Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Hi, Dan Zach from the Washington Post. Madam Speaker, how confident are you, or what is the likelihood that the House will pass the reconciliation bill the week of November 15th? And then for any representatives, President Obama spoke yesterday about Congress inhibiting the boldest kind of action, even when Democrats are in a slim majority or when Republicans are in control. Do you see Congress ever evolving to the point where it can fully meet the boldness required when a Democratic president is in power to address this issue? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Yes, we intend, that is our plan, to pass the bill the week of November 15th, as is indicated in our statements that were made at the time of passing the infrastructure bill, and we're very proud of that. Let me just say that when President Obama was president and we had the majority in the first term of that, we did pass in the House a very strong climate bill. 60 votes in the Senate is an obstacle that is very hard to overcome, and that is another subject for another day. But we did pass that. In the Bush administration, we passed the biggest energy bill addressing many of the concerns that cause the climate crisis, the biggest energy bill in the history of our country. So I appreciate what the president had to say. Of course, his vision was bigger than what the next 6 years of Republican majority would bring. But even when we had a Democratic majority, 60, we did not have 60 in the Senate.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at the United Nations Climate Summit in Glasgow, Scotland, where she's leading a congressional delegation. The Congressional Budget Office Director Philip Swagel posting today that CBO will start releasing estimates of portions of the social spending bill this week, and a cost estimate of the full bill will come out as soon as practicable. He writes the analysis of the bill's many provisions is complicated. One of the leaders of the House Democratic moderates is Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey. He was interviewed on MSNBC about the social spending bill and also that other infrastructure bill, which is now passed and will soon be signed into law.
Democrats and Republicans came together, fix our roads, our bridges, our obviously the Gateway Tunnel between New York and New Jersey, get that going, our water infrastructure, rails, transit systems, so much that's good for the country, 2 million jobs a year. And you bring up the other package, which also is very important, something that I've supported, the reconciliation package called Build Back Better, that will help us reinstate SALT, the state local tax deduction, and get taxes down for people in my district. What we asked for, and as you know, Secretary, we got the bill basically final language on Thursday night. And there were new things added, so we had questions to make sure that we understood how it's paid for, to understand exactly what's in it. And we think it's the responsible thing to do to read that bill. It's 2,000 pages, the new bill, and to compare it to the old text, which was also 2,000 pages. We've had people working around the clock to make sure we know what's in there, and make sure it's great for our districts. And I'm optimistic that that'll happen. And the numbers that we got, we hope will match up with what we received already from the White House and Treasury on some of the data on the cost of the bill and see how they match up with the investments. So I'm optimistic that the data we will get next week, which we're expecting, will all match up and we'll be able to move forward.
That's Congressman Josh Gottheimer on MSNBC. The House and Senate not in session this week. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, giving his party's view on what's been happening on Fox News Channel, interviewed Monday night. He criticized the 13 House Republicans who voted on Friday for the infrastructure spending bill, $1.2 trillion, giving the margin it needed to pass and become law, and in his view, it sets up the House vote on the larger social spending and tax bill.
Well, I think it's a bad bill. I think it is really unfortunate that we saw House Republicans assist the White House. They were getting their clocks cleaned. It's another $1.2 trillion in spending. It's on top of the trillions in spending we've already seen. As you noted, that is already driving inflation across the economy. The price of food is going up. The price of milk is going up. The price of gasoline is going up. The price of rent and homes and lumbers, everything is going up. And the Biden administration is causing it. Unfortunately, we saw a handful of House Republicans decide to rescue Nancy Pelosi from the bill crashing on its own. I think that did two things that were really problematic. Number one, it did what the Biden White House wanted to do, which is change the subject from the shellacking they took in Virginia. Virginia was a terrific victory. I was there on election night with Glenn Youngkin. It was a tremendous example of the parents of Virginia saying hell no to this radical left-wing approach that said that parents have no role in their kids' education. But the House Republicans, or a handful of them, decided to change the subject from that. And I think it also increased momentum for the really terrible bill, which is the next one, the Bernie Sanders socialist budget. I pray to God the Bernie Sanders socialist budget doesn't pass, but these House Republicans sadly made it more likely.
Senator Ted Cruz on Fox News Monday night. Vice President Kamala Harris also weighing in on the social spending bill. As it was an unusual context, she began a trip in Paris, France. She was touring the Pasteur Institute and talking about the scientific method, comparing it to how politicians address problems, which led to a reporter's question about Congress and the spending bill debate.
One of the things I think people in politics and government should really take from the approach of scientists. Scientists operate with a hypothesis. I love that. A hypothesis. It's well thought out, it's well planned. They start out with a hypothesis, and then they test it out. Knowing, invariably, if you're trying something for the first time, there will be glitches, there will be mistakes. Then everyone gets together, no one gets beat up about it. You analyze it, what went wrong, reevaluate, update the hypothesis, and start again. with us in government. We campaign with the plan. Uppercase T, uppercase P, the plan. And then the environment is such that we're expected to defend the plan. Even when the first time we roll it out, there may be some glitches and it's time to reevaluate and then do it again. I think that if we, in public policy and in public offices, thought more, and if the culture around our work were more like scientists, I think we'd see a lot more work getting done.
That you need to bring more civilian people inside politics, you know?
Exactly, but it's good to be here. Very good to be here, and thank you.
Is that a criticism of the current process that's going on with the Build Back Better?
No, it's just a general statement. I've been saying this for years. I think that if we all agree that we want to encourage innovation, if we want to encourage good ideas, every good idea, any good idea, I like to call it the first time you try a recipe. It's usually not perfect. And then you reevaluate, oh, that was too much salt, not enough, not enough whatever. And you make it the second time and it's better. And your family the first time says, it's a little salty, but nobody's mad at you. And then you reconvene and you do it better the next time. This is the nature of innovation, the nature of doing things a new way. And my only admonition is that let's encourage innovative thought. Let's encourage being better. But let's also understand that it is part of the nature of a process that encourages breaking out of status quo to be better, that there will be glitches, there will be mistakes. But if you don't make the same mistake twice, and if it is on a path of actually improving human condition and human life, that's a good process, and we should encourage it, not discourage it. That's my only point.
Thank you.
Vice President Kamala Harris in Paris at the Pasteur Institute. France 24 reports that her mother, who was a scientist, collaborated with the Institute's scientists on breast cancer research in the 1980s. And that article also notes that Harris's 4-day visit is aimed at restoring ties strained by a secret U.S.-British submarine deal with Australia that left France in the lurch. Back to the U.S., the White House not yet announcing when President Biden will sign the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law. He wants a big signing ceremony, said over the weekend that he wants both Democratic and Republican lawmakers there. That may need to wait until Congress is back in session next week. But the White House continuing this week to bring up department secretaries to talk about what's in the bill. Today, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo on broadband.
The Infrastructure Investment Act allocates $65 billion to expand broadband in communities all across America, to create low-cost options and subsidize the cost of service for those who need it. Of that $65 billion, about $45 billion will be coming to the Commerce Department at NTIA to administer that program. I will say this is an area that I am particularly passionate about, having been a governor during the pandemic and being with people who didn't have broadband, children who couldn't go to school, people who couldn't go see a doctor or a therapist. It is heartbreaking, and it showed in a very real and human way how essential broadband is. And the fact of the matter is we have to close the digital divide, period. And this infrastructure bill will allow us to do that, and the $48 billion coming to the Commerce Department will allow us to do that.
The Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo, in the White House briefing room, she said initially every state will be getting $100 million to allocate in grants to build out broadband. And then beyond that, states will get additional money based on need and how many underserved households a state has regarding broadband. Raimondo also saying that while many infrastructure projects in the U.S. are shovel-ready, expanding broadband access may take a little longer.
When do you think the first expansion projects will get underway?
I'm sorry, say again?
When will the projects get underway? When do you think states will physically start to
so, I would say first we have to have the law, and then it'll take us some time to get set up, some number of months. So, it's hard to say. I would say, well into next year.
Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. President Biden plans to visit the Port of Baltimore on Wednesday, and today CNBC reports the administration outlined several initiatives aimed at addressing immediate supply chain challenges and other disruptions affecting global commerce. Several administration officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, said the administration will begin work within the next 60 days with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on $4 billion worth of construction work at coastal ports, inland waterways, as well as other Corps-eligible facilities. And the plan will also identify and prioritize $3.4 billion in upgrades to obsolete inspection facilities that will make international trade more efficient through the northern and southern borders. Again, that according to senior administration officials talking with CNBC. On Wall Street today, the Dow was down 112, NASDAQ down 95, S&P down 16. Turning to coronavirus, Pfizer and BioNTech asking for the okay for vaccine booster shots in the U.S. for anyone 18 or older. It's an expansion of the current authorization that is only for the elderly and those vulnerable to the virus due to underlying health conditions or work or living circumstances. The U.S. still averaging over 70,000 COVID-19 cases a day, about 1,200 deaths per day. And all the while, tens of millions of Americans are unvaccinated, many by choice. Pfizer's president and CEO, Albert Bourla, asked about the impact of vaccine misinformation, interviewed by Atlantic Council President Fred Kemp.
There was some fake news during this period of time about the vaccines, all sorts of conspiracy theories. How did you deal with that, and how did you navigate that, and where do you feel the primary source of this sort of fake news was? How damaging was this to us?
I'm afraid it was quite a lot damaging, and there was, particularly with us, we were targeted by a lot of, let's say, dark organizations that you don't really know the ownership. You suspect that there are some countries behind. We were getting a lot of briefings from CIA, from FBI about attacks that may happen to us, cyber attacks, I mean, but also about the spread of misinformation. There are two groups of people, right? There are the people that they are vaccinated, there are people that they're skeptical about the vaccination, and both of them are afraid. Those that are getting the vaccine, they are afraid of the disease, and they believe that because people are not getting vaccinated, they are increasing the risk to them. They are increasing the exposure. So they are, let's say, mad with them that they don't get the vaccine. Those that they don't get the vaccine, they're afraid of the vaccine. And they are mad with the people that are pressing them to get it.
And
those I understand. Yeah. They are very good people. They are decent people, that they have a fear, and I understand it, and they don't want to take chances. But there is a very small part of professionals which they circulate on purpose misinformation so that they will mislead those that they have concern. Those people are criminals. They're not bad people, they're criminals because they literally costed millions of lives.
And should be treated as criminals as well, those who have done that.
Atlantic Council President Fred Kemp interviewing the head of Pfizer, Albert Bourla. The interview recorded last Friday, released by the Atlantic Council today. Washington Today continues in a minute.
And this is for all nonfiction book readers out there. Check out the new C-SPAN podcast, About Books. Each episode delves into news about the publishing industry, reports on bestsellers, trends, and book reviews. Now, this week's episode features former longtime president and publisher of Regnery Books, Margie Ross. She discusses the cancel culture in the publishing industry. We'll also look at some new nonfiction books by members of Congress, including Trump impeachment manager Adam Schiff of California. The About Books podcast. Find it and follow it wherever you get your podcasts, including on the new C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Military Times writes that Dennis McDonough was part of President Barack Obama's administration when officials began a high-profile push to solve the problems of veterans' homelessness, suicide, and toxic exposure illnesses. Now, a decade later, and serving as the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, McDonough acknowledges the frustration that the topics are still at the top of his agency's to-do list. That was Military Times. Veterans Day is Thursday, and today the Secretary spoke at the National Press Club in Washington. This is what he had to say about suicide.
There's no more important outcome than preventing veteran suicide. Because one veteran who dies by suicide is one too many. Mental health services are critical for suicide prevention, so keeping them going during the pandemic has been our primary focus. Fortunately, vets have adapted seamlessly to telemental health sessions, attending 5.6 million sessions already this year, more than doubling last year, 5.6 million sessions. We've also massively ramped up our lethal means safety efforts, putting time and space between veterans in crisis and their firearms by passing out more than 9,500 gun locks this year alone, and by launching an awareness campaign for veterans and their families that's garnered over 1.7 billion impressions. And in the aftermath of the war in Afghanistan, we've reached out to every veteran in our network to remind them that their service matters and that we're here for them. Whether they want to speak to another veteran, talk to a therapist, call our crisis line at 800-273-8255, text us at 838-255, visit one of our vet centers, or access any of VA's mental health services online at mentalhealth.va.gov. We are standing by and we're here to help. Today and every day. Because mental health care is health care. As the Secretary of Defense has said, mental health is health, and veterans' health is our top priority.
Dennis McDonough is the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, today at the National Press Club. This Veterans Day, November 11th, is the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. And for the first time in nearly that long, members of the public are able to walk on the plaza in front of the tomb, normally where the guards are, and lay a flower. This morning there was an opening ceremony with Karen Durham Aguilera, Executive Director of Army National Military Cemeteries and Arlington National Cemetery, along with Harry Rockabove, a descendant of the Crow Nation chief who attended the tomb's dedication in 1921.
This amphitheater is an iconic symbol of Arlington National Cemetery and our nation's commitment to honoring those who have served and sacrificed for our great nation. Hewn from white marble, this impressive structure represents the nation's commitment to the ideals of our country and the brave service men and women who are dedicated to protecting our freedom and our liberty. Its centerpiece behind me is a hollow memorial to those who remain known but to God, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Today, in just a few minutes, we will be the first of our visitors over these next few days to approach the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier on the plaza, so that all may lay a flower to personally honor those who gave up both their life and their identity for our country. This mirrors the celebration a century ago when people from across the nation came to Arlington National Cemetery to lay flowers when the World War I unknown soldier was interred. This is also remarkable because it's the first time in 96 years that visitors have been allowed to approach the tomb. So the next 2 days will truly be historic and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Again, thank you all for gathering here today at Arlington National Cemetery. Our team is honored to lead the Department of Defense effort to properly recognize this incredible milestone, and we are privileged to host these events over the next few days. And now I am honored to be followed by Mr. Harry Rockabove. Thank you.
100 years ago today, Chief Plentycoo stood on this very ground we are standing on at the dedication ceremony of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in 1921. We, the Upsaloge, also known as the Crow people, are here to respect and honor the bravery of men and women who gave their lives for freedom. We continue the legacy of Chief Plenicus in commitment to the United States of America in culture, strength, and language of the Crow people.
Harry Rockabove and Karen Durham Aguilera at Arlington National Cemetery early Tuesday morning. And soon after, members of the Crow Nation did walk in front of the tomb to lay flowers. Arlington National Cemetery saying on its website that it anticipates holding another event in our lifetimes in which the public will be able to approach the tomb in this manner. The public able to lay flowers Tuesday and Wednesday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern. From the Associated Press, conservative Supreme Court justices expressing skepticism Tuesday about a Texas death row inmate's demand that a chaplain be allowed to pray out loud and touch him during his execution. Texas says an inmate's spiritual advisor may pray with and counsel him until he's taken into the execution chamber and restrained on a gurney. But Texas says that after that, while the spiritual advisor is nearby, he cannot speak to or touch the inmate. Here's part of today's oral argument in this First Amendment freedom of religion case. Justice Clarence Thomas questioning Seth Kretzer, attorney for the inmate, John Ramirez.
If we think that Mr. Ramirez has changed his requests a number of times and has filed last-minute complaints that and if we assume that that's some indication of gaming the system, what should we do with that with respect to assessing the sincerity of his beliefs?
I think, Justice Thomas, you can assess the sincerity of Mr. Ramirez's belief by looking at the best evidence that there is in the record, which is a seriatim, one handwritten, signed grievance after another, repeatedly requesting the same thing.
Yeah, but you have people filing grievances in non-religious contexts, and that's not evidence of their religious beliefs. It's evidence that obviously they don't want to be executed. And in some instances, they're gaming the system. I guess my question is, can one's repeated filing of complaints, particularly at the last minute, not only be seen as evidence of gaming of the system, but also of the sincerity of religious beliefs?
Well, Justice Thomas, I can certainly see how a hypothetical inmate perhaps filing a last-minute such request might so be construed. I can only speak as Mr. Ramirez's attorney, and I do not play games. There's no dilatory tactics in this case. When the state set the execution date in the year 2020, I filed the 1983 lawsuit, and the state asked me to dismiss it without prejudice. When the state filed again, got a new death warrant in the year 2020, it was only Mr. Ramirez immediately filed grievances. There was no waiting there, and the state responded by handing him a copy of this new policy they promulgated on April 21st, 2021. Mr. Ramirez has always, Justice Thomas, filed these grievances within days of learning. In that case, he learned from the director of chaplaincy that there'd be this no-touch requirement that was suddenly imposed in the year 2021. And yet it was the state that delays. There is, I think, a very alarming intention you see in the Riley affidavit, the state lodged in their materials, where she said that as the execution date gets quicker, the state regards these grievances and tries to process them all the faster. That's not at all what happened here, Justice Thomas. Mr. Ramirez filed his request in level 2 grievance in July of 2021. The state sat on this for 6 weeks until we were right on the cusp of the execution. I would contend if there's any delay here, Justice Thomas, it's on the part of the state. There's no insincerity as to Mr. Ramirez's consistently stated beliefs, and Mr. Ramirez has repeatedly asked as quickly as possible for the least relief as he is required to from the prison system.
Attorney Seth Kretzer before the U.S. Supreme Court, questioned by Justice Clarence Thomas. This case argued today Ramirez v. Collier. More explanation from the Associated Press article. Executions in Texas, the nation's busiest death penalty state, have been delayed while the court considers the question. In this case, the outcome will not take anyone off death row, but could make clear what religious accommodations officials must make for inmates who are being put to death. A second Supreme Court case argued today considers whether residents of Puerto Rico are denied equal protection under the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution because they cannot get SSI, Supplemental Security Income, part of the Social Security system. It provides incomes to needy, elderly, blind, and disabled people. Here's part of that oral argument. Justice Sonia Sotomayor questioning the U.S. Deputy Solicitor General Curtis Gannon.
Puerto Ricans are citizens, and the Constitution applies to them. Their needy people are being treated different than the needy people in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the Northern Mariana Islands. So explain how those people, none of whom pay taxes to the federal government, how are they different?
They are different. First of all, there may be some taxes from which they are exempt, like the excise taxes, as we do point out. But the primary reason why they are different is because they live in a community and a locality where there is less tax money being taken by the federal government out of that community to be being taken into general revenues at the federal level, which is then distributed through various federal benefit programs and other ways.
So what do I do with the record that I see in the First Circuit case, Pena, that shows that Puerto Ricans pay, maybe not excise tax, maybe not income tax, but that they pay as much taxes, other combined taxes, as other states in the Union? Meaning it's nice to sort of cherry pick one tax, but that's true around the country. The government gives some tax benefits to some things and not others. You got to look at the structure as a whole to see, is there a really substantial difference? But I'm looking at that record, and it shows Puerto Ricans as a community and all the other taxes they pay more than many states of the Union. So I don't know how exempting out one or two taxes gets you away from seeing whether the government's distinction is rational based on the need of the citizens who are supposed to receive the money.
And the tax bite that the federal government is taking from the entire community is lower. And so on a per capita basis,
it's not. I mean, the Pena case showed it exceeds some other states.
The aggregate amount of money that is being sent to Washington is greater than in some states, but there's a larger community in Puerto Rico that's being taxed. And they are, of course, getting benefits under many federal programs. And so our point here is not...
So are the states. Yes. There are many other programs. So you can't compare apples and oranges.
Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor questioning U.S. Deputy Solicitor General Curtis Gannon in today's case, U.S. v. Vaeo Maduro. By the way, Justice Sotomayor's parents were born in Puerto Rico. The case involves Jose Luis Vaeo Maduro, a Puerto Rican resident who received SSI payments after he had some strokes while living in New York. He moved back to Puerto Rico, and payments continued to be put into his bank account in New York until he notified the Social Security Administration. Then the payments stopped, and the government sued to get some money back. Despite what you heard from the Justice Sotomayor as to how the ruling may go, Associated Press writes, the justice acknowledged that the differential treatment of Puerto Rico might be problematic, but several suggested it's up to Congress, not the courts, to act. You can find the full audio only from the Supreme Court at the moment, our library, a video library, at cspan.org. Former U.S. Senator Max Cleland has passed away. He was a Vietnam veteran who lost both legs and an arm in the war, and after the war was chosen by President Jimmy Carter to lead the Veterans Administration. In 1996, he was elected U.S. Senator from Georgia as a Democrat. He lost re-election in 2002. In 2009, He was on C-SPAN 2's Book TV talking about his memoir.
Churchill once said that politics was a lot like war, except in war you could be killed only once, in politics you could get killed many times. So I've been killed a few times in politics, and I was almost killed in war. So that's what the book is about. It's called Heart of a Patriot, How I Found the Courage to Survive Vietnam, Walter Reed, and Karl Rove. One might mention, one might wonder, why did I put in Karl Rove? Walter Reed is understandable. Vietnam is certainly understandable. Why did I put in Karl Rove? Because for me, Rovian politics stands American politics on its head. Ostensibly, we are, as candidates, supposed to put our best foot forward, even if we don't have any feet. So that's what I always liked to do. The Rove political idea is basically one that says if you have weak positives for your candidate, and God knows with George Bush he certainly did, then your whole campaign should be all about driving up the negatives of your opposition, even if they served in the military, going after that. People forget that the first George Bush campaign directed by Karl Rove in terms of the presidential race had McCain and Bush locked in combat in South Carolina, and with Ralph Reed helping out, doing push polls in South Carolina, trying to drive up McCain's negatives. Then 5 members of the United States Senate, me included, all 5 of us, fellow Vietnam veterans, Republicans and Democrats, wrote a letter on McCain's behalf in South Carolina saying that the charges against him in terms of his military service were not true. McCain lost. Then in 2002, they came against me here, basically with a candidate who had never served in the American military at all and had gotten out of military service several times with deferments. And to put my face up alongside that of Saddam Hussein and bin Laden was bull feathers.
Former Senator Max Cleland in 2009 on C-SPAN's Book TV from our video library. He was speaking at the Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Max Cleland has died. He was 79 years old. The reference in the title of his memoir to how he survived Walter Reed is that after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2002, a long-dormant case of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in Vietnam, sent him to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center for treatment. Number of tributes today to him. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For more top Washington stories sent to your inbox every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, the Cook Political Report's David Wasserman discusses what the Virginia and New Jersey governor's races mean for campaign 2022 and the latest on redistricting. Also, Andrew Ujafusa of Education Week talks about what critical race theory is and where it originated. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.